Good afternoon. My name is Adam Olson. I'm the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands. Welcome to the Public Circle Live. This is episode number 20. And as you can see with me, I don't have all this with me today. I have another friend of mine. His name is Ian Bruce. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes. I'd love for you to share the fact that you are watching us this afternoon, that you're here with us, and leave a comment, a question. We're going to get into talking about salmon, Peninsula streams, and finding out who it is that's with me. But first, I want to tell you, we're just going to do a bit of a format change. It used to be that I would just come on here and talk for 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 4 times a month, usually every time on Fridays. And we've decided that what we're going to do is we're going to start to feature local people who've been working in the community, that have been doing a great job making a difference in our community, want to put a focus more on the community stuff. So still, 3 times a month, I'm going to come on and talk about the week that was in BC politics, talk about the week that was in Saanich North and the Islands, and 1 time a month, I'm going to put the focus onto the community, and then we're going to produce that and send it out in a newsletter and do all sorts of cool stuff with it. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to get to my interview today. And we're going to introduce you to Ian Bruce, a friend of mine. We've been known each other since at least 2008, maybe a little bit more before that, when I got elected to Central Saanich Council. Ian is the executive coordinator of the Peninsula Streams Society. And as we were saying just before we went on live here, that the Peninsula Streams Society was the first organization to lobby me literally minutes after I got sworn in as a Central Saanich councillor in 2008. Dennis Copeland said, if you're going to be anything, you're going to do work for the Peninsula Streams, you're going to do work for the shorekeepers, you got to come for a beer with me or else. I was a bit afraid, and so I went for a beer with him. And it's been since then that I've been taken by the organization that's been looking after our streams. So, Ian, thank you for being the first community champion guest that we have on our show.
HThank you, Adam.
And tell me a little bit, who is Ian Bruce?
Well, good question. Who is Ian Bruce? Ian Bruce is, his birthday's coming up on Monday, which is great.
Young guy.
Yeah, so I was born in Victoria, and I went to UVic and became a marine biologist, and went up to the west coast of Vancouver Island to do something, get a job actually, and I ended up in fish culture, in salmon enhancement, working for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And I was training people to run small hatcheries, First Nations and community groups. And then I ran out of that work because I did my job too well. And actually my supervisor said, I've got good news and I've got bad news. Good news is you've done your job really well. The bad news is we're cutting your contract because you've done your job so well. So at that point in time, it was around 1984. So salmon farming was on the horizon. So I was in a perfect position to become the first salmon farmer in Colquitz Sound, which right now is a very dubious distinction. At that time, First Nations, environmentalists, and even the commercial fishermen thought salmon farming was the wave of the future. It was going to take pressure off wild stocks, and it was going to, basically save the salmon. Mm-hmm. Well, we know how that's turned out since then. And after about 10 years in that industry, I decided to come back to something that I really enjoyed, which is working with the community, working with fish, but also working with habitat and being on the other side of the fence, so to speak. Right. So I came down to Victoria, worked a little bit with the provincial government, and then got an opportunity to work with Vern Jacks, Chief Vern Jacks at Sacred First Nation and the airport on a little project of the 2 streams that feed into Pat Bay. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then the funding ran out. And so Missy McDuffie, who of Rain Coast, and I were, she had the Hagen Kiwanis group with Dennis. We got together and with Tom Davis of the Sydney Anglers and a couple other groups, we formed Peninsula Streams. So at that point in time, it was go big or go home. So that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years, and helping build a brand and an organization to help fish, help the habitat, and give people and children an opportunity to give back to the resource.
So you are the executive coordinator.
Yes.
So you can say a little bit about what that is, but what does Peninsula Streams do in its essence?
Okay. Well, Peninsula Streams is basically the three legs of the stool are community stewardship, which gives an opportunity, or we give an opportunity for people to volunteer to help on salmon enhancement projects or stream habitat or beach cleanups or invasive species removal. And that includes children through our education, environmental education programs, and also adults. So the community stewardship is one part of it. We also do stream restoration, which is stream restoration, watershed restoration, where we'll work on factors that have harmed or limiting the watershed's productivity around salmon, but not exclusively around salmon. And the third thing, the third leg of the stool is environmental education, and that we've been doing for over 12 years now, and it's been very successful. We've probably educated or been involved with over 12,000 students on the peninsula and into Victoria over that period of time. So those are the three things: stewardship, restoration, environmental education.
And as executive coordinator, what role do you play in the organization?
Well, it's interesting. It's not an executive director or coordinators, because Missy was a coordinator of her project at Hagen Kiwanis. That's what we're called. We're called project coordinators. So when we came together, we called ourselves coordinators. Right. So what I do is I do the planning, the environmental scouting, so to speak. So I'll find a damaged ecosystem in the local area, and I'll say, well, that should be fixed, and I think I know how we'll fund it and how we'll do it, and then I'll, with my team of employees, staff, we come up with a plan, we find the funding, and we execute and deliver the project.
So quickly, what sources of funding does Peninsula Streams pull from? I imagine that there's numerous sources, and each project is probably different, but just throw out a few of the common sources of funding for your projects that you do. Okay,
so for say environmental education, Victoria Foundation is amazing, right? So they've been our go-to group for that. And prior to that, Van City Credit Union has actually done a lot for us. If we want to look toward stewardship or stream restoration projects, Pacific Salmon Foundation have been awesome. So they're our cornerstone for that. Provincial gaming money, we've accessed gaming grants. We also have been very fortunate to get some DFO programs in the last few years for funding habitat restoration projects. And then there's the municipalities, and we provide services back to the municipalities in terms of education and supporting their staff. We give professional biological services to their staff, and they supply some core funding for us in return. And then we have other donors, corporations and individuals. So we pull money from as many different sources as we need to basically do what we do.
I guess the goal would be to spend less time trying to find the money and more time trying to do the three legs of the stool. But anyways, we can.
Well, I just wanted to actually talk about that. There's a model right now with a federal program called the Coastal Restoration Fund, where everything's funded. They don't have to go and find partnership funding. And I thought, well, that'd be really cool, because then we wouldn't have to put the work into fundraising. But the fundraising and the way we put things together right now, we have to reach out very broadly within the community. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we get more community buy-in, we get more community participation. And in one way, it's building partnerships around the environment is almost as important as the work itself. So I like the idea of a fully funded model, but I think there's some really good benefits in making groups like ours go out and find partners.
Cool. So if you're just joining me, I'm having a conversation with Ian Bruce. He's the executive coordinator of the Peninsula Stream Society, talking a little bit about the work that Peninsula Streams does. Three legs of the stool. Let's see if I can remember them. Environmental education, stewardship, and the third one?
Restoration.
So the three pieces of the work that's done. and it started here on the Saanich Peninsula, but you've broadened out the work that Peninsula Stream does. I know that you do work in many of my colleagues' ridings around the Capital Regional District. Got a project right now in Millstream as an example. Done work in Colquitz Creek. Done work in 1010 Creek, Hagen-Quantis Creek, right? All of these creeks are around that people, you're driving along West Saanich Road, you're going to cross most of these creeks at some point along the way. So one of the things, I want to pull this to the provincial government for a bit, because as people may or may not know, I've spent a lot of time working on salmon issues in the spring session of the legislature in this past spring session. And one of the things that we continue to hear is the province constantly deferring to the federal government, saying, well, Adam, salmon issues are primarily a federal issue. Salmon issues are primarily a federal issue. And every answer was put in that context. And I would say, well, salmon issues are also, while the management of salmon might be a federal issue, the impact that the provincial government has on salmon habitat is massive. And one of the first times that we ran into each other was in a video on the reinventing stormwater management. Right. And this was a piece that I really was super new in my job, but we were talking about the responsibility that we have about stormwater management. Maybe take it back 10 years when we were there and talk about the relationship that municipalities and the provincial government have on salmon-bearing streams and the impact of stormwater and the impact that stormwater has on the work that you've been doing at Peninsula Streams.
Well, that's a
very briefly,
yeah,
actually.
Very briefly. So with poor stormwater, we have poor water quality. With poor water quality, we don't have stream-dependent species like salmon and cutthroat salmon. Used to be called cutthroat trout, but they're called cutthroat salmon now. And so it's funny, the jurisdictions are very much overlapping. And unfortunately, in the last 10 years, and it's gotten better in the last 5 years, but in the last 10, 15 years, we had situations where the province didn't want to deal with it, so they tried to hand it to the feds. The feds would try to hand it back to the province, and then they both tried to dump it on the municipalities. And so the responsibility for stormwater and for infractions of the Fisheries Act and of provincial statutes by people were not being addressed by any of the agencies, right? So they were, and it was partly because of capacity, because previous governments, both provincially and federally, cut funding to staff and to enforcement. Right. So they didn't want to deal with these small issues, and so the environment's been served very poorly in the last 15, 20 years, but it is getting better now. And hopefully with our new Wild Salmon Advisory Council, there'll be a better outcome for salmon.
So a couple of the other areas that deeply impact salmon, fish-bearing streams and salmon habitat would be agriculture, the straightening of creeks into turning them into ditches, and poor water quality from maybe increased nutrient loads, but as well volume is a huge problem. You can put spawning gravel down and then have it blow out into the inlet. The other one would be community development. The salmon go out as juveniles and they come back, and the creek that they had was now a ditch, and a housing development built on it 4 years later. So the provincial government does and legislates and makes a lot of decisions that impact salmon and salmon habitat and on the ground. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that. I might be kind of trying to direct you to an area in which I think is important, but
yes, there is a lot of impacts that the provincial government has control of, and one of them is the Agricultural Waste Control Regulation, which is part of the Environmental Management Act. And personally, I don't think it's enforced as well as it needs to be. I think sometimes the agricultural industry gets a bit of a free ride on water quality impacts. I think that in terms of urban development and suburban development, there has been some moves in best management practices incorporating things like rain gardens into new developments. I think there's a huge opportunity for retrofitting many of our roads and streets and sidewalk areas between paved areas and the road to infiltrate and store stormwater and do improvements on it. There's been some great work done in Vancouver. So I think there's great opportunities there. And I think encouraging it and leadership is one way the province can do help us on both the urban and also on the agricultural side of things.
So one of the things that I know that you're particularly good at, Ian, is getting the so we talked about the funding, but there's inevitably in all of these projects there's people involved, and interests and property rights and property ownership, and it's not just all land that's owned by the Crown. No. So it's not like you have to go to the provincial or federal government and they can say yes and off you go. Oftentimes we're talking about a stream that passes through 20 backyards or across 4 large farms, or as you pointed out, the airport and First Nations. And so it's about relationships, and a lot of the work that you do and a lot of the benefit to our community has been your ability to build the relationships, build the trust. Talk a little bit about some of the, that aspect of the work.
Well, that's very good. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that quite as pointedly, but it is one of the most rewarding parts of what I do. And it's because I have to reach out to people. And you try to find what works for everybody. And try to find common ground and not to be threatening. And that's, I think, the best way you can go is that, in the end, right, it's not the end of the world, right? But you know what? We can make things a lot better, and it's not going to hurt you. And we can work with you, and we can work with your neighbor, and we can work with the other neighbors. And if we all put in a little bit, we can help out. And that's kind of the role I have to play as a kind of a facilitator, peacemaker on behalf of the fish. You keep bringing it back to it's for the fish. And if you can bring kids into it, and you get the school kids involved, that takes a lot of people's positions. Comes down a bit because the kids are involved, and it's like, okay, we don't want to disappoint the kids. They want their fish to survive, so we'll listen to you, right? And that's all I ask, is that if you listen and help move forward, then that's what we can work with.
One of the things that I saw as a municipal councillor, the benefits of working with and helping with funding, but as well partnering with Peninsula Streams, was that when a municipality went and knocked on somebody's door, there was one response. And when a community group based up with a lot of volunteers and a lot of community funding sources goes and knocks on the door of a neighborhood, there's a lot of difference. And we've had conversations in the past that said, Ian, maybe you should probably have this conversation and not me. And then you'll call me and be like, hey, Adam, I need you to have a conversation that I can't have. And
that's right.
So there is an important, as someone in government and then as someone working alongside, there is a lot of common ground that we've found over the years in advancing in different aspects of the conversation.
Yes, and that's a very good point about what you made, is that quite frankly, there's a few property owners out there, maybe more than a few, that if the municipality comes to them and wants something, anything, access or cooperation, they'll go, okay, here's my chance. I can get some of my tax money back, or I'm gonna hold them to task, and this is my opportunity to stick it to the muni, right? So if I go in there, they know we don't really have much in terms of resources, so they're not going to get much from me. And if I can get them to cooperate, then their expectations of getting something back are really quite low. Having said that, we often will go to property owners and say, we can make the creek better on your property, and we'll do it with other people's money. So how about that? And they'll go, okay, so you just want permission and us to get out of your way? That's all we want. And if you can offer that and not ask them for anything but permission, then you get a pretty good acceptance rate.
So I think that there's a lesson here, and the lesson for me in the position that I'm in the government right now is finding common ground and working with people that may have different values or different ideas, different directions that they want to go, and that always working towards finding that common ground you can build the relationship off of that. Then you get to some of the more difficult discussions a little bit later down the road, like, by the way, it'd be great if you could contribute to this investment we're making on your property as well.
Well, I've actually opened the door and then sometimes kicked it open and said, well, yeah, it would be nice for some support on this, because oftentimes, we'll do a project on someone's property and we're actually increasing the value of that property.
Of course you are. Yeah.
So, it's like, well, it's going to add $100,000 to your property. Why don't you throw in 10, So, and that's sometimes not a hard sell either.
So we're in the process. You and I are both on the Wild Salmon Advisory Council. You alluded to that earlier. We are kind of going like back to the future to a certain extent. I'll say we're going back to the future. We're going back to 1997, and we're creating a made in BC salmon policy. But it's exciting. I don't want to actually hold it back. I think that it's important to note that we do seem in this situation to be recreating the wheel to some extent, but it's a wheel that needs to be put back into motion. And so I'm excited about the Wild Salmon Advisory Council. And so tell me about what your hopes are for salmon and from the provincial, federal relationship, local governments, First Nations, just maybe some high level stuff.
Well, I don't want to put too fine of a point in it, but we are in a crisis. And I want to talk about something right now. It's called shifting baselines with respect to natural resources, whether it's quality of habitat, whether it's the number of fish coming back. Every time a new generation comes along, the baseline of what they remember the environment of being when they were small is degraded. Mm-hmm. So the environment that I inherited when I first remember when I was 5 years old was certainly less vibrant, and there's less biodiversity than we'll say my grandfather's time. And if you go back in your heritage time, look at the changes. So what happens is with shifting baselines is that we accept that what we saw when we were young as being good, and we say, well, things have deteriorated from them, but we're only using our own baseline as that. Well, if you look at it on the broad spectrum over several generations, the baseline has, we're way down the rabbit hole. So what I want to say about this is that the Wild Salmon Advisory Council and provincial power in terms of management of salmon habitat, harvesting, everything to do with salmon affects BC in so many different ways. It's an iconic species. People like salmon just because they're salmon. They don't have to catch them. They don't have to eat them. They're just happy that they're there. They feed the forest. They feed the birds. They feed the whales. They feed the seals. They feed
our imagination, in fact.
Everything else. And we're in a crisis situation. And this was said 25 years. This was said by Peter Pierce in 1982. We were in a crisis in 1984 when the Pierce report came out. This was a crisis in 1997 when the provincial government brought fisheries renewal in. It's another crisis now, but we're way worse circumstances than we were in those other crises. So we need to do a lot, and we need to do it quickly, or I believe that salmon will be kind of something that'll be nostalgic. Remember when there was salmon? And I don't want to see that not in my lifetime, but not in my children's lifetime. So the Wild Salmon Advisory Council, to tell you the truth, I don't believe that the resource can be managed by Ottawa because it's back east. I think that British Columbia has to take more control of the salmon resource in all aspects in order for it to be have any chance of survival.
So I can tell you I'm nostalgic about salmon fishing in Saanich Inlet with my dad. My dad's nostalgic about salmon fishing in Saanich Inlet with his dad, and the shifting baseline's the example. That's the example. Yeah. The story that my grandfather had that you could walk across their backs to visit your relatives in Malahat was repeated to me when we were in up in Moose territory. Up at anyway, the name is escaping me right now. But when we're up North Island, same thing. You could walk across their backs. To get to the other side of the creeks and the rivers. I had an old fisherman that worked on Colquitz Creek said that they used to be so thick in there you could walk across their backs. Now, if you tried to walk across their backs, you'd drown if you couldn't swim, right? And I used to fish with my dad, and Ella and Silas haven't fished with me in Saanich Inlet. So that's the example of shifting baselines. That's the sadness that we face. It was urgent in 1984. It's urgent in 1997. It's more urgent now than ever in 2018. I'm super stoked that the provincial government is taking this on, that we're going to take on the DFO and the federal government, the federal politicians, and that hopefully we take on this responsibility. Anyway, I'm hopeful because I think there's no other choice for us to be other than hopeful.
Right. And I would just like to say, too, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be confrontational with the federal government. I believe that the federal government, if they're approached the right way by the province with the support of First Nations, the federal government will actually give up responsibilities with respect to the salmon. Because you know what? They know they're not doing a very good job with it. And they know whatever they do or don't do is political peril for them. So I think they would actually like to unload the responsibility if given a chance.
I can tell you, I respect that comment. I have a hard time not being confrontational. I grew up on Sartlip, right? Yeah. Sartlip First Nation, and really, like the relationship between the DFO and the federal government and the local First Nations here. So maybe it's a little bit of good cop, bad cop. You play good cop. I have a hard time. The levels of harassment and anyway, irritation. Perhaps I need to tone it down. So I appreciate it anyway. Or maybe I need to tune it up and you can tone it down and we can... One way or another, I think that it's an everybody responsibility. It's not just the federal... Like, this is something that I said. They say, it's a federal responsibility. I say it's a provincial response, a local government. It's a First Nations... The fact of the matter is that we're all responsible. Every one of us, right? We just got this big, long post about this and that. And I agree with it. I haven't gone through it all into it, but... I'm sure that a lot of it's true. The fact of the matter is that we own a bit of the responsibility in our own hearts for the actions that we take. Trudeau, John Horgan, the provincial government, past governments, lots of blame to go around. How we're going to fix it is up to us. So anyway, so one final thing about salmon conservation, because I think that this is an important piece that the Wild Salmon Advisory Council was criticized in the early stages about not having enough on salmon conservation, and I know that it's something that you're passionate about is the conservation of these important resources and important fish. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that before we sign off for the day. What are your thoughts on conservation?
Well, conservation of salmon has a lot of different legs to that stool. I mean, there's harvest and the role of harvests, and then the special relationship First Nations have within that harvesting framework. We have habitat. Then on the international stage, we have high seas interceptions, which is still going on by other countries. We have the Pacific Salmon Treaty with the United States, which is, again, our fish are being caught in Alaska and we catch American fish. So the conservation of fish is not a simple matter of cut the sports fishermen off, or stop the food fishing, or stop the commercial fishing, or it's working with all the information, the best science we've got, and allowing access for fishing on the strong stocks and protecting the weak stocks as best we can. And some people will have to adjust their choice of fish. So whereas the sports industry, we're like Chinook and coho, maybe they can't fish Chinook and coho for a while, but they could go to pink and chum, right? And perhaps sockeye when they're available. So I think that there has to be some adjustments that way, and people's expectations definitely have to be readjusted. The idea that we're going to fish at levels that we saw even last year or 5 years ago aren't going to happen soon. So people's expectations about what they're going to extract from the resource and have to be lowered, and also to people's expectations about the environments that they're going to live in around urban and areas. They have to be able to give up on that, which might mean giving up a little property for a rain garden instead of a lawn, for example. So I think we all have a part to play, as you said earlier.
Yeah. So I love the fact that we've got you in here to talk about this important. This goes right back to the very beginning, to 10 years ago that I've been in politics. Got elected for the first time in 2008, and thanks to the good work of Dennis Copeland over the years, a real warrior on the beaches and in the creeks and streams. And I know he just recently retired as the finance person for Peninsula Stream. So kudos to Dennis for the hard work that he's done, and all the people. And I think that it's important to point out that we've got Ian here talking about Peninsula Streams, but maybe talk about the great people that you have around you, Francesca, to the volunteers that come out and put the gumboots on and do the work.
Well, yeah, and I just want to say I've got a great staff, and Francesca's coming up on her 10th anniversary next week, and my assistant coordinator Brian is doing really well as my mentee, I guess it's called. If I'm a mentor,
well, you'd be the mentor. Yeah,
I'm the mentor. So
I don't know
I think it's the mentee. Anyway,
Brian the mentee.
Brian the mentee. Anyway, so I was out with Brian a couple nights ago at Swan Creek. We had 10 volunteers out, and they were wheelbarrowing gravel and rock into Swan Creek, where there is no gravel and rock. So they're providing habitat where there isn't any. That creek got moved and redug because people wanted a better road, which is called Mackenzie Avenue. And that creek and the fish's habitat got not even a second thought, in the process of us. That's what we want. We want transportation. We want these infrastructure projects, but there is a cost. So the volunteers actually are the core of it. Our educational programs like Creatures of Habitat, we need dozens of volunteers, but it's very rewarding work by being able to work with grade 6 students and give them an opportunity to clear invasive species, to do environmental work. So the volunteers are really important. We've had some volunteers come and they come and they go and they come back. We've had other volunteers that have been around for 20 years almost, and other ones come in for one session and they leave again. It's all over the map, but it's great to have them out at any time. We've got some beach cleanups coming up. We've got a whole series of beach cleanups that Brian's leading. We're doing Brentwood Bay, I believe, this weekend on Sunday, 9:00 at the Verdier Avenue at the bottom by the washrooms, and Bays and Bays coming up in I think August 25th, and we've done a few others since then, and we're trying to do our bit for plastics in the oceans, and we're cleaning up the highway and roadsides, because that's where the plastics are getting onto our beach for the most part. They get flushed down, off the roads from litter, and so volunteers are really important, and I couldn't have done what I've managed to accomplish over these 18 years now without the volunteers.
Yeah, unbelievable, volunteer-driven organization. And in fact, one of the things that I talked about earlier this week was the desire of government often to do everything. And what that's done is, the bureaucracy can do it better. The government can do this better, and that seems to be the perception. And I think that we really need to get to the next generation of thinking, which is going back to what it used to be, which was actually we as a community can do pretty good. Like we as a community, when we pull together, when we set our minds to doing something, we can do that. Yeah. And what we need, I think, are rules and regulations where it actually empowers and enables the community to get back in, because you're right about the fish. There's nothing that's made my son Silas's eyes light up than putting those hatchery fish that he raised in that tank into Todd Creek, and he's there. He knows exactly where he dropped that fish. Yeah. And he's got his own fish will be coming back like next year.
It's convinced, yeah.
Like this is the 4-year cycle of his fish. Yeah. It'll be back. Yeah. And then he got to do it again in grade 5. So anyways, and you should know, we're going to sign off here now. But you should know that when we went to Silas's grade 5, and we can't tip the hat to your staff without acknowledging the fact. People think it's weird that he didn't acknowledge the fact that Emily works with your organization. My wife. No, but it's like, it's like he's got Emily's anyway. My wife Emily works with Peninsula Streams as a contractor, but Emily and I were sitting at my son's grade 5 farewell from Brentwood, and they have this video about what kids want to be, and then what was the biggest memory, like the most substantial memory that they had while they in their time at Brentwood Elementary. You'll be happy to know that what they want to be when they grow up is a YouTuber. So if you can figure out a way to YouTuber fish habitat rehabilitation, then you'll be a genius, because they'll all come work for you.
That's very interesting.
They want to be YouTubers. I was like, what's a YouTuber?
I think I'm gonna maybe work with that.
I realized I'm actually a YouTuber. But anyway, it's a Facebooker. So every Friday. The number 2, I'll say it's the number 2 thing. Number 2 thing that they remember most. The number 1 thing was going to Camp Emmeline as a grade 5, and it was really fresh. It was just like a few weeks before. So they remembered it was the best, swimming and slides and, probably hunting or shooting. No, maybe they weren't shooting weapons. But anyway, the number 2 thing was releasing salmon fry in Todd Creek. So it goes to, I think, the point, which is that I think the kids love it. I think that we can increase the quality of life, increase the quality of people's property, the value of people's property, by increasing the quality of our creeks and streams and our watersheds, and it just makes a better place to live. So Ian Bruce, the executive coordinator of Peninsula Streams, thank you so much for coming in. I've written these notes down because I don't know that you know this stuff that I'm about to say right now. The Peninsula Streams website is peninsulastreams.ca, peninsulastreams.ca. You can find it in the notes below in the description of this video. Did you know that was your website?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Bottom of my email.
You can email Peninsula Streams at
peninsulastreams@gmail.com.
That's right. You can call Peninsula Streams, and there was 2 numbers. There was one to Ian's and then one to Francesca's. I'm sorry, Francesca. The number is 250-363-6480. Now, whose number is that? That's Francesca's number, 363-6480. And I encourage you, join their email list, attend their events, volunteer on the weekends, do a creek, do a beach cleanup, and any final thoughts?
Well, we are on Facebook. I think I'm not a Twitterer, but we're on Twitter. I'm not a tweeter, but we're on Facebook, and our events are posted on our website as well as on our Facebook page. So come and visit, and come out and volunteer and help the environment. And you can come out for one time, and if you don't come back, that's great. If you do come back, that's even better.
I'll say this: there's an election coming, a municipal election coming, and for all those candidates and prospective candidates that want to know what Peninsula Streams is doing to improve the quality of the communities that you're hoping to be the elected leader of, you could go out and go put your gumboots on and get in the creeks and streams and see it for yourself. Get on the beaches, so that you know that when you're making the investment in the organization later, you know what you're investing in. So I would strongly recommend that. And you can get one more thing. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, and this comes back to where we're going to go with this, and it comes back to what you said about empowering citizens to be able to help the environment. One thing the provincial government could do is support stewardship of the environment more than they do, and that's something that the new government, I've been hoping them to bring it on provincially. I'm still waiting. Hopefully through this Wild Salmon Advisory Council, there'll be some funding for that. Yeah. Not to take it over completely, but to just support and get organizations like ours going. And we don't need that much support. We need a little bit. But if you support it completely, as soon as that funding goes, it collapses like it has before.
Yeah.
We've come up during the lean times, so we do well. We've done well in the lean times. we can do better. We can do more if with a little bit of support. But I'd see other organizations getting a little bit of seed money that would help them.
This is a really good point. Incenting volunteerism.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird thing to say, but finding ways to get people out to volunteer.
Well, volunteers aren't free.
No, absolutely.
Well,
no, it's a big cost to your organization.
It's a huge thing. When I've had municipal politicians go, well, what do you need money for? Volunteers are free, and you go, well, you don't. They need care and feeding and organization and insurance and
That's right. Those are investments.
Those are investments.
Yeah.
And so that's it. Come and see our website. Come out for an event. That'd be great.
So I'll leave you with this. Again, my name is Adam Olson. I'm the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands. I appreciate you jumping on with us today, episode number 20. We've done this for 20 weeks. It's the Public Circle Live. This is our weekly show. I'm on Facebook all the time, but I'm on Facebook Live at 4:30 on Friday afternoons, every Friday afternoon at 4:30. We just booked another really incredible guest for later this month, which we'll be talking about in September. So I encourage you to join us every Friday here on Facebook. You can check out past episodes of our of the Public Circle Live on my YouTube account, where I am I'm not a YouTuber. You can find my website, adamolson.ca. It's got all of the legislative work. And actually, I want to give you a little bit of a hint. Earlier today, I was working on a constituency office website. So we're separating the two. More to come on all the communications work that we've been doing to improve communications, public engagement for your constituency office here in Saanich North and the Islands. I appreciate all the comments that we have had left with us today. I encourage you to leave a comment, to leave a question. I'll hop in later on this afternoon or sometime this weekend and respond to some of them. Maybe Ian will jump in and respond to some of the other ones that have to do with Peninsula Streams. I really appreciate you joining us today. Actually, I should say before that, you can email us at adam.olson.mla@ledge.bc.ca. You can call my office, 250-655-5600. We're open here to serve the members of the public for Saanich North and the Islands from Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're in the Landmark building at the foot of Beacon. Come say hi, come visit us. Thank you for joining us, Ian, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Until next week, Hayekwa.